Planet America's fake news.
What the hell is going on here?
Welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Ciadello.
This week, Robert Mueller breaks his silence, but did he say anything new?
No.
He said almost nothing he hadn't already said in the report, and he made it clear that he doesn't intend to.
Also this week, Spygate. Is the real scandal the FBI's surveillance of the Trump campaign?
No!
Someone was running operations against Trump campaign people.
We'll tell you everything you need to know about the dark horse in the Democratic presidential field.
I'm going to be getting all libertarian about the prosecution of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. But first, we've got nothing left to news.
For almost 2 years, ever since being appointed special counsel, Robert Mueller has remained publicly silent until this week.
Good morning, everyone.
As Mueller packed up and left the Justice Department, he finally spoke for a little over 9 minutes. The former Marine and FBI director took no questions and said he hoped not to have to testify before Congress. Mueller's bottom line is it's all in that 448-page report. There's really nothing he wants to add to that. But he was happy to give us the crib notes. First, Russian election interference. All that hacking and WikiLeaking was designed to damage Hillary Clinton and help Trump.
The releases were designed and timed to interfere with our election and to damage a presidential candidate.
As for the complicity of the Trump campaign,
there was insufficient evidence to charge a broader conspiracy.
But we knew all that anyway, ever since the redacted report was released last month. But still, the question has lingered whether President Trump obstructed justice and would have been charged were he not the president. Well, Mueller says he was not ever going to indict Trump.
The Constitution requires a process other than the criminal justice system to formally accuse a sitting president of wrongdoing.
So that's why Mueller says he did not reach a determination about whether the president had committed a crime. But at the same time, Mueller says he would have cleared the president if he could.
If we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so.
And that is where there is now quite a bit of daylight between what Mueller now says and what Attorney General Bill Barr claims Mueller found.
He made it clear that he had not made the determination that there was a crime.
So the bottom line, Mueller rejects the idea that this was a witch hunt, and because the Russian meddling was serious, the investigation into Russian meddling was also serious, and therefore any attempt to obstruct that investigation was a serious matter. But he maintains it's the role of Congress to decide whether to further investigate or impeach, not him to indict. And he doesn't want to help Congress by testifying.
Yeah, look, that position of Mueller's where he says he can't even consider charging the president certainly was news to Bill Barr.
Special Counsel Mueller did not indicate that his purpose was to leave the decision to Congress. I hope that was not his view, since we don't convene grand juries and conduct criminal investigations for that purpose.
But it makes me wonder why Mueller didn't just reveal that position 18 months ago so he could have conducted the investigation without creating so much anticipation and anxiety. And it's created this odd situation where Mueller has now twice effectively declared that he can't find Trump innocent of obstruction. Meanwhile, this is what he has to say about the Russians he indicted.
And we are not commenting on the guilt or the innocence of any specific defendant. Every defendant is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty.
So he gave the indicted Russians more benefit of the doubt than he gave Trump. This is a very strange scenario.
So if Trump had been indicted, he'd be presumed innocent. I get it. Well, Mueller's appearance did prod the president into sending a tweet where, whether he meant to or not, conceded what he has long rejected, the idea that Russia helped him to win the White House.
Russia, Russia, Russia. That's all you heard at the beginning of this witch hunt hoax. ... And now Russia has disappeared because I had nothing to do with Russia helping me to get elected.
To be fair, while Russia did try to help him win, I don't think that necessarily made a lot of difference. Remember, in the middle of October 2016, after Russia had done their best, Clinton was leading the Real Clear Politics polling average by 8 points. And then James Comey reopened the Hillary email investigation.
The straw that broke the camel's back, maybe.
The president, though, made some legal waves of his own last week when he said,
"Sir, the Constitution says treason is punishable by death. You've accused your adversaries of treason. Who specifically are you accusing of treason?"
Well, I think a number of people. If you look at Comey, if you look at McCabe, if you look at probably people higher than that, if you look at Strzok, if you look at his lover, Lisa Page, his wonderful lover.
wow, that is a lot of people who are about to die. And on the same day, President Trump delegated full and complete authority to declassify information to the Attorney General for the purposes of his investigation into the surveillance activities during the 2016 presidential election. Sorry, the investigation into what?
Break it down.
Yes, we certainly are going to break it down. It does seem like 100 years ago. In fact, it's less than 3. July 2016. In 3 days, Hillary Clinton will officially become the Democratic Party's presidential nominee. The 10-point lead over Republican Donald Trump has narrowed to 3 after a bruising primary battle against Bernie Sanders, and as the party tries to unite a political bombshell.
WikiLeaks releasing nearly 20,000 internal DNC emails, including some that appear to show efforts to undercut the rise of Bernie Sanders.
Cybersecurity experts and US intelligence quickly point the finger at Russia, and candidate Trump faces questions about why Putin would be trying to help him by damaging Clinton.
What do I have to get involved with Putin for? I have nothing to do with Putin. I've never spoken to him. I don't know anything about him other than he will respect me. He doesn't respect our president.
And it was 4 days later, after being contacted by Australian authorities, the FBI began a secret investigation into possible links between the Russian government and the Trump campaign. Australia's High Commissioner to London, Alexander Downer, reported a May meeting over gins and tonic he'd had with Trump Foreign Policy Advisor George Papadopoulos. Papadopoulos told him Russia had dirt on Hillary Clinton. He'd been told that by a mysterious London-based professor with links to Russia named Joseph Mifsud. Mifsud was helping Papadopoulos arrange a meeting between Trump and Putin. Papadopoulos now claims the meeting with Downer was a part of an international conspiracy to undermine Trump. Meanwhile, the FBI's attention turned to another Trump foreign policy advisor, Carter Page. Page was an energy industry consultant and had been interviewed by the FBI in 2013 after meeting with a Russian intelligence agent at a conference in New York. That Russian agent was recorded by US officials saying he thought Page could be recruited as a spy because he wants to earn lots of money. The FBI had spoken to Page again in March 2016, around the time he started advising Trump. The unverified dossier of opposition research compiled by former MI6 agent Christopher Steele claimed that Carter Page met with Russian operatives in July 2016 and discussed lifting sanctions against a Russian oil company if Trump won. That became the basis of the FBI's application for a FISA, or Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Warrant, in October 2016 to monitor Carter Page. So, was Carter Page a Russian agent?
It's just such a joke that it's beyond words.
Well, Robert Mueller found the following words: he did not establish that Page coordinated with the Russian government. While none of that was public knowledge before the November 2016 election, the Democratic Party and the Clinton campaign emails hacked by Russia and distributed by websites including WikiLeaks certainly were. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange had made no secret of his opposition to Hillary Clinton.
The American liberal press, in falling over themselves to defend Hillary Clinton, are erecting a demon that is going to put nooses around everyone's necks as soon as she wins the election, which he is almost certainly going to do.
Not so much as it turned out, but still the Russian campaign of embarrassing leaks aimed at damaging Clinton continued right up until the election.
The Clinton campaign calls this a crime reminiscent of Watergate, but worse. More than 1,900 emails released just this weekend. We are talking about a slow leak every day, a new batch.
A few days after Trump was sworn in as America's 45th president, George Papadopoulos was interviewed by the FBI about his meetings with Joseph Mifsud and a Russian woman claiming to be Putin's niece. Putin doesn't have a niece. Papadopoulos lied to investigators about the meetings and was sentenced to 14 days in jail for those lies. But now it is his investigators who are under investigation.
Okay, so what do we know? Well, we know that no one committed treason because treason is defined in the Constitution as either levying war against America or giving aid and comfort to America's enemies. And when they say enemies, they mean enemies in war, as in Germany did not become an enemy until America formally entered World War II. So, short of James Comey joining ISIS, no one committed treason. We can also answer this.
Was this a specific attempt to basically steal an election?
No, it wasn't. The Trump-hating ex-FBI agent Peter Strzok put it best during his hearing last year.
In the summer of 2016, I was one of a handful of people who knew the details of Russian election interference and its possible connections with members of the Trump campaign. This information had the potential to derail and quite possibly defeat Mr. Trump, but the thought of expressing that or exposing that information never crossed my mind.
The FBI had more than enough gossip to sink the Trump campaign in 2016, but this was what they leaked. Investigating Donald Trump, FBI sees no clear link to Russia. But we also know that Peter Strzok character sent out some pretty interesting text messages while he was spearheading the Trump investigation in 2016. Strzok's lover said, "Trump's not ever going to become president, right?" And Strzok replied, no, he won't. We'll stop it. Now, Strzok said he was referring to the American people stopping Trump, not the FBI. Maybe so. But then there was this text. Strzok wrote, "I want to believe that there's no way Trump gets elected, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40. Now, Republicans have never let this one go.
And they were saying things like, we must stop this president. We need an insurance policy against this president. That, in my view, when you have people that are in the highest echelons of the law enforcement of this nation saying things like that, that sounds an awful lot like a coup.
Well, that escalated quickly. That text apparently sounded just like an armed takeover of the government. Strzok disagreed, saying, "The analogy I'm drawing is you're unlikely to die before you're 40, but nevertheless many people buy life insurance. Just like life insurance, you have to take into account any potential possibility." So he's saying they needed to show due diligence about Trump even though he was unlikely to be elected. That may well be the case, but those and many other Peter Strzok text messages potentially indicated or created the appearance that investigative decisions were impacted by bias or improper considerations, according to the Justice Department Inspector General's report last year. So, how much did Strzok compromise the investigation before he was eventually booted by Mueller? We don't know. John, you mentioned the investigation started when that guy Joseph Mifsud told George Papadopoulos about the Clinton dirt.
Yep.
Mueller referred to him as a London-based professor who had connections to Russia. But this is how House Intelligence Committee Republican Devin Nunes refers to him.
I don't believe that Mifsud is a Russian agent, but I do believe that Mifsud is an agent of someone. But let's say that he was working for another foreign government, or let's say that he was working for some organization that was hired by either a spy agency or a contractor or possibly a campaign.
A lot of let's says there, but Nunes is clearly intimating that the investigation was started because of a stitch-up.
Yeah.
Is he right? We don't know. You also mentioned before the Pfizer application. Now, you might not realise this, but one of the Pfizer application's key sources, the Steele dossier, was not entirely accurate.
Really?
Yes. Steele has even admitted that he relied on an unverified report from the CNN website posted by members of the public that hadn't been checked for accuracy. When Steele was briefing the Assistant Deputy Secretary of State of his findings, he told her that secret Russian payments were being made through the Russian consulate in Miami. But there is no Russian consulate in Miami. So she told that to the FBI. Yet a week later, the FBI told the Pfizer court that they assessed Steele to be reliable, and they were unaware of any derogatory information pertaining to Steele. Steele also told that Deputy Assistant Secretary of State that his client was keen to see the dossier come to light prior to Election Day, making it completely obvious who his client was being paid by. Yet the FBI a week later wrote this word salad in a footnote to describe Steele's motivations, ending with, "The FBI speculates that the person who hired Steele was likely looking for information that could be used to discredit Trump's campaign." Not sure that was as clear as they could be about that. So, just how sloppy were the FBI in checking Steele's work, and how much evidence did they really have for Carter Page's surveillance? We don't know. And did the FBI have enough evidence to justify sending an informant or spy to talk to the Trump campaign? We don't know. So, plenty of questions to be investigated there, John. Should we get some answers?
Well, we'll ask some questions at least. Let's see how we go. With us from Washington, D.C. is Stewart Baker. He's a lawyer and cybersecurity expert. He served as the General Counsel at the National Security Agency and Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security in the Bush 43 administration. Mr. Baker, welcome to Planet America.
I'm glad to.
So, Robert Mueller broke his silence this week, but did we learn anything?
Well, I wouldn't call it breaking his silence. He said almost nothing he hadn't already said in the report, and he made it clear that he doesn't intend to. So he can be called to testify, and he will probably read excerpts from the report to explain what the report means. It is consistent with his resolute lack of interest in being in the limelight. And it made very little news because it really largely repeated things that he had said already in the report.
Now, Mueller handed down a big, loud, not innocent verdict for Trump. Isn't that a complete perversion of justice?
He said, I would clear the president if I had clear evidence that he hadn't done anything wrong. And he basically says we can't say we had clear evidence that he did nothing wrong. I'm not sure that's a perversion of justice. It would have been better for him to say either he's prosecuting or he's not, but he was also bound by a policy that said you don't prosecute sitting presidents.
Now, of course, President Trump and his Attorney General would have us believe the real scandal was the FBI spying on the Trump campaign, leading to a baseless witch hunt. Why should we take that seriously?
So there was a famous statement about the Trump candidacy that has proven to be remarkably accurate, which is that Trump's supporters take him seriously but not literally, and his detractors take him literally but not seriously. I think that's probably the right approach here, to take the accusations seriously, but maybe not the specifics of it. The idea that the FBI was improperly spying on the campaign is unlikely, but there is enough smoke there that it's worth investigating to see if there's a fire.
Now, some FBI-friendly people say that Trump has made way too much out of all this spying stuff because having an informant speak to a few members of a campaign is not only a standard step in any investigation, but a pretty gentle step at that. What do you think about that?
There's no doubt that there was evidence that needed to be investigated, at a minimum that the Russians were trying to have an influence on the campaign, and that maybe they were looking for or finding allies in the Trump campaign, although that evidence was always a little thin. That said, I think it's fair to say that the investigators here showed surprisingly little sense that they were acting on behalf of a Democratic administration investigating an insurgent Republican candidate, and that it was absolutely essential to have all your facts right and to turn every corner as squarely as possible. and there were mistakes, sloppiness, in some cases actions that could be viewed as biased, and clear improprieties in a few cases that had never occurred in any other context. So all of that is the smoke that suggests that it's worth asking, was this investigation done absolutely correctly? And if not, what should we change?
Do you have any doubts that there was enough justification to launch an investigation in the first place?
No, I think that investigation was proper. I mean, it was obvious that the Russians were interfering in the campaign. They had just dumped all of Hillary, or all of the DNC's emails on the internet, and it was causing her massive pain electorally. That had to be investigated. The contacts with the Russian government on the part of people who were advising the Trump campaign were, there were too many to ignore. It turns out, reading the report, they were all pretty sporadic and apparently unrelated, but there was enough smoke there to justify an investigation, which it turns out ended up finding no real collusion or conspiracy between the Trump campaign and its officials and the Russians. But I understand why they did it.
Obviously, the FISA applications for Carter Page are a key aspect of these investigations. Do you think that the FBI was too trusting of Christopher Steele in those applications?
Yes, I do. He was a really somebody they had been in the trenches with. And the fact that he was now working for a private client maybe didn't get as much attention in the spirit of camaraderie that had been built up. And then when he began leaking to reporters, I think the FBI wasn't quick enough to identify that and to tell, for example, the FISA court that he had been a leaker, that he had confessed to some people at the Justice Department or the State Department that he was desperate to keep Trump from being elected. Those things do cast doubt on some of his dossier and probably should have led the FBI to be more cautious about it than they were.
What are your expectations of the investigations into the investigation? Will it be like the Mueller report itself and just become something of a political Rorschach test?
Yes, inevitably. Already, the opposition, the people who supported the Mueller investigation, are describing this as a conspiracy theory that doesn't deserve the resources that are being put into it, and questioning Attorney General Barr's good faith in launching it. So it will be a political football, but I actually believe that both the Inspector General, Mr. Horowitz, and the U.S. Attorney, Mr. Durham, who've been asked to conduct these investigations, are scrupulous, nonpartisan investigators who have been around a long time and have handled investigations that are very sensitive into both administrations, earlier administrations. So at the end of the day, we're going to get a report, and it will tell us much more about the initiation of the investigation and the use of the investigation during the transition for partisan purposes, and whether there are changes in FBI or intelligence community procedures that we ought to adopt.
Stewart Baker, thank you for being with us.
Glad to do it.
This incredibly long and expensive election campaign leading to the statistically likely re-election of President Trump 2020.
Now to a check of the polls for the preferred Democratic presidential nominee next year. Nationally, Vice President Joe Biden still enjoys a healthy 18-point lead over second place Bernie Sanders, although that has been cut by 2. Elizabeth Warren is holding on to third spot this week, while Pete Buttigieg has moved into fourth, 3 points in front of Beto O'Rourke. Then comes Cory Booker, stuck on 3% support, and then there are the 11 1%ers. Polls from First to Vote Iowa, though, suggest this Democratic race is closer and less predictable than those national polls suggest. A Gravis poll had Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders tied for first place on 19 points in Iowa, with Pete Buttigieg in third, just 5 points behind them on 14, with Harris and Warren both on 6. Now, it's probably time we found out a little bit more about this candidate with the funny name who is outpacing plenty of his better-known rivals. Pete Buttigieg was still in his 20s when he was first elected mayor of South Bend, Indiana, population 101,180. The Harvard graduate and Rhodes Scholar went to work reforming the city's economy and services, soon being voted America's best mayor. Then, while still mayor, came the call up from the US Navy Reserve, and in 2014, he was deployed to Afghanistan as an intelligence officer.
It was humbling. I was a pretty junior officer, so had to get used to having a boss again, had to get used to taking instructions instead of giving them.
It was after returning from Afghanistan, as the Supreme Court was preparing to legalise same-sex marriage across the United States, the then 33-year-old announced in an editorial that he is gay.
I want to be evaluated based on the kind of job that I'm doing. Are the potholes getting filled in? Is the trash getting picked up? Is the snow getting plowed? Are our neighbourhoods getting better? Is our downtown stronger?
And 5 months later, Buttigieg was elected to a second term as mayor of South Bend with 80% of the vote.
The mayor talked in his victory speech about the support that he'd received from the community during his first term, during his time in Afghanistan, and this summer when he came out as gay.
Anything that any of us do, from the most basic things, from washing the dishes and raking the leaves, to raising a family, falling in love, starting a business. All of that is only possible because we can count on a city.
But Mayor Pete was already looking well beyond South Bend. In 2017, he ran, unsuccessfully, to be chair of the Democratic National Committee. In June 2018, he married his partner, Chasten Gleisman. In January this year, he announced he was exploring a presidential run, and this April, he headed back to South Bend to make it official.
My name is Pete Buttigieg. They call me Mayor Pete. I am a proud son of South Bend, Indiana, and I am running for President of the United States.
OK, but what does Pete Buttigieg stand for? He emerged as a top-tier candidate really through the force of his biography, but he has been criticised for being light on policy specifics. At just 37, Buttigieg would be the youngest ever US president. He's seen as more moderate than the likes of Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, although he describes himself as progressive. He supports Medicare for all who want it, supports more affordable education but not free college. He says he supports gun control and universal background checks, and as a veteran, he opposes the use of troops in Syria or Venezuela and what he terms as endless wars. Last week, he went into the belly of the beast, appearing at a Fox News town hall, something that rivals like Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris have refused to do. And he took on President Trump and Fox News itself.
And when you got Tucker Carlson saying that immigrants make America dirty, when you've got Laura Ingraham comparing detention centers with children in cages to summer camps, then there is a reason why anybody has to swallow hard and think twice before participating in this media ecosystem. But I also believe that even though some of those hosts are not always there in good faith, I think a lot of people who tune into this network who do it in good faith.
And President Trump, using his new nickname for Buttigieg, seemed less than happy that Fox had given Mayor Pete any airtime.
Last night I watched Alfred E. Newman. What's going on with Fox, by the way? What's going on there? They're putting more Democrats on than you have Republicans. It's something strange is going on at Fox, folks. Something very strange.
Poor guy. Fox has been seeing other politicians. Even worse, Fox anchor Brit Hume then added insult to injury by replying to Trump with, he's willing to be questioned by Chris Wallace, something you've barely done since you've been president. Ouch. And Brit Hume wasn't done poking Trump with a stick yet, because then he said,
maybe the most impressive candidate I've seen since the emergence of Barack Obama.
A reminder, Trump came after Obama. So that is a Fox News host saying that both Obama and Buttigieg are more impressive than Trump. He would not have liked that. Although I must say, I do think that Obama and Buttigieg have some things in common. Like, for instance, Sanders supporters really don't like either of them. They're both smooth, charming, technocrat consultant types. Except Buttigieg, on top of that, is also chummy with a bunch of corporate high flyers. How many small-town mayors can you imagine in this context?
I'm here with my friend Pete Buttigieg, who's the mayor here.
His friend. It turns out that Buttigieg was Facebook's 287th user. I'm not sure who that mixture impresses, but I'll tell you who it doesn't impress. Black voters. This poll you're looking at allows people to nominate several candidates who they would consider supporting. We knew Biden was doing well with black voters already, 54% support for him, but only 6% of black voters were even considering supporting Buttigieg. That is a serious Achilles heel. But now to Julian Assange, who has been hit with 17 more charges under the Espionage Act. None of them were for the 2016 election, by the way. This was all for WikiLeaks' work with Chelsea Manning in 2010. And if America can get their hands on Assange, he's facing 170 years jail. So, is it time for free speech advocates to panic? Let's find out.
Big, beautiful world.
The Obama administration was no friend to leakers. They prosecuted more leakers under the Espionage Act than every earlier administration in history combined. Although Trump is following Obama's lead, Assange would be his 5th prosecution. Nevertheless, while Obama's Justice Department did consider charging Assange, even they decided against it because they said it would chill investigative journalism. But why? After all, the Department of Justice last week said that they take seriously the role of journalists in our democracy. They don't want to target journalists for their reporting, but unfortunately, Julian Assange is no journalist. That's been backed up by opinion makers from CNN to Fox News.
This is why I don't believe he deserves the protections of a journalist.
Allow me to calmly counter. What's wrong with you? Who exactly do you propose qualifies as a journalist? Once upon a time, it was easy to know who was a member of the press. They wore this hat. But things aren't so simple now. Is Lee Sales part of the press? Am I part of the press? Is Steve Jacobs part of the press? What about someone submitting a 1,000-word investigative piece to the Washington Post? What if they write exactly the same piece and post it on Facebook? Well, according to the Supreme Court, the First Amendment, i.e. freedom of the press, does not belong to any definable category of persons or entities. It belongs to all who exercise its freedoms. Furthermore, in 2014, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals held that amateur bloggers enjoy freedom of the press because, with the advent of the internet and decline of print and broadcast media, the line between media and others who wish to comment on political and social issues becomes far more blurred. And therefore, a First Amendment distinction between the institutional press and other speakers is unworkable. In other words, whether your business card says journalist or not has got nothing to do with whether you enjoy the protections of the free press. So why then would Julian Assange not qualify? Well, according to the Justice Department's press release, Assange published the unredacted names of human sources. And real journalists do not do that, except when they do. Like when much of the press last year revealed the name of the FBI informant who spied on the Trump campaign. They even revealed his middle initial. But wait, Assange actively solicited classified information. Journalists don't do that. Wrong! The Washington Post even offers a special service for leakers that will stop them getting caught. And as for Assange declaring lists of leaks that he most wants, Assange isn't the only person who does that.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
Of course, the whole concern about Hillary's emails was they might have classified information. But you know, this is actually all irrelevant because Assange wasn't charged with any of that. So why don't we look at what he was charged with? Assange was charged under Section 793 for conspiring and receiving and storing and then publishing classified information. I want you to see what kind of language these guys use. Let's go down to Part E. Thank you. One of the things that Assange was charged with was having unauthorized possession of, access to, or control over any document which is relating to the national defense that he willfully communicated, delivered, or transmitted to any person not entitled to receive it. That's it. No mention of being a journalist or revealing protected sources or dumping documents on the internet or not acting in the public interest or messing with elections or mistreating his cat. The only thing that Assange has been charged with here is holding unauthorized information that is classified that he then published to the public. And that describes every newspaper on earth. Or as civil libertarian Greg Barnes puts it,
any media organisation anywhere in the world that publishes material that the US government classifies as secret could find themselves being prosecuted and sent to jail for a period of life.
Talking about which, a number of newspapers held documents and then published them from exactly the same batch of classified documents that Assange is now being charged over. Do you remember the video of Americans shooting unarmed civilians in Iraq from 2010?
Light them all up.
202 traffic, 260s.
Come on, fire.
Now, two of them were journalists. It was a newsworthy story, but that footage there is still classified. And yet the New York Times ran with it. So what's to stop them from being jailed for life? Hell, I'm playing it too. What's to stop me? Whoa, you guys are quick.
This way, sir.
See you in 170 years. It's okay. Turns out they were strippers.
And I just thought you got a good lawyer. Now, last week we looked at what can go wrong when a party nominates an anti-establishment insurgent for the presidency. So, in the interest of balance, let's look at what can go wrong when you play it safe and nominate an establishment favourite instead. This is the story of Mondale 84. In 1972, George McGovern's presidential hopes were badly damaged after he dumped his vice presidential running mate over mental health issues. 4 years later, Democratic nominee Jimmy Carter wasn't taking any chances.
We need a government that works, and we need a government that cares.
Senator Walter Fritz Mondale of Minnesota was a safe pair of hands, and after Carter's victory in his low-key Midwestern way, Mondale helped redefine the vice presidency. A trusted lieutenant with the Washington experience Carter lacked, Mondale also took on a major diplomatic role, travelling the world more like an extra Secretary of State than a traditional VP.
No people have contributed more to the strength and the vitality and the spirit and the culture of my country than those of Spanish origin.
When Jimmy Carter was swept from office by Ronald Reagan in 1980, Mondale was a frontrunner for the Democrats' nomination in 1984. When perennial favourite Ted Kennedy ruled himself out of the campaign in late 1982, Mondale went to the top of the polls with 32% support. Next came former astronaut and Ohio Senator John Glenn on 14%, former Senator George McGovern on 6%, and former California Governor Jerry Brown on 5%. By the following May, John Glenn's campaign was taking off, fueled by the enormous name recognition that came from having been the first American in orbit.
Godspeed, John Glenn.
John Glenn edged in front of Mondale in an LA Times poll 28 to 26, but more importantly, he was thrashing President Reagan by 17 points.
That's the same vague gobbledygook of nothing we've been hearing all through this campaign. Let's just get with it.
But by late 1983, Walter Mondale was back in front of John Glenn, who, despite being an American hero, failed to create a coherent political message or raise much money. By then, another two challenges had emerged. There was civil rights leader, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who offered a fresh approach to the Cold War.
Reduce the tensions
And then the money that are now being used in capital-intensive killer weapons can be used to make our societies more profitable and more abundant.
And there was the charismatic Kennedy-esque Colorado Senator Gary Hart.
I think what I have certainly prepares me for the presidency.
And Fritz Mondale was suddenly looking a little like yesterday's man.
I think that one of my most difficult problems is that I've been in public life for a long time.
Once the primaries got underway, Mondale was mostly in front, but Gary Hart was never far behind.
289 for Mondale, 252 for various others, and 186 for Senator Hart.
And Senator Hart had his eyes on the big prize.
Well, I'm fighting for the future of this country and contesting with Ronald Reagan.
Hart won major primary victories in Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio, and California. Still, he knew he was up against the party establishment.
The Washington insiders and special interests have handpicked their candidate for president. But I offer our party and our country a choice. This election is about the failure of the past and the promise of the future.
And as the primaries dragged on, Hart and Jackson were splitting the anti-Mondale vote.
There we go.
In the end, Gary Hart won more states, but Mondale won more votes and more delegates. Fritz was still short of the 1,967 delegates he needed to seal the nomination, so it was up to the party's insiders, the superdelegates, to confirm Mondale's victory on the first ballot at the convention in San Francisco in July. Knowing his candidacy lacked the enthusiasm of Hart supporters or the sense of history around Jesse Jackson's White House run, Walter Mondale named Congresswoman Geraldine Ferraro as his vice presidential running mate, the first woman ever to be on a major party ticket.
America is the land where dreams can come true for all of us.
But at the Democratic convention, Jesse Jackson stole the show.
This is not a perfect party. We're not a perfect people. Yet we are called to a perfect mission.
Mondale and Ferraro barnstormed the nation in the fall of 1984, but the American economy was on the rise again, and up with it came President Reagan's approval ratings. Reagan was rusty at times during the presidential debates, but ultimately made the argument that America was now better off than it had been under Carter and Mondale.
If the job were finished, I might have thought twice about seeking re-election to this job.
And in the end, the 1984 election wasn't even close.
Just a short time ago, Walter Mondale phoned me, and
Mondale could only win his home state of Minnesota and the District of Columbia. Reagan won 59% of the vote and 525 electoral college votes. Would Gary Hart have provided a better contrast to President Reagan? Perhaps. Would Jesse Jackson have been electable in 1984? Almost certainly not. But in the end, Democrats went for a safe pair of hands in former Vice President Mondale over the grassroots enthusiasm for his rivals. And, in 1984 at least, it did not pay off. Whew, what a big show, but that's it. I'm going home.
No doubt to watch the Facebook Extra that we are about to record, which you can find here, and to watch our show and the Extra again on iView. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.